They're bold, unique, distinct, and extraordinary. They speak, build, save, and never, ever rest. No wonder the things they make are classic, modern, and beautiful. Each handmade brick by Glen-Gery is individually shaped, uniquely textured, and richly colored, all to create a look that is unmistakably you. Meticulously crafted to imperfect perfection, they combine to create something truly greater than the sum of their parts. Brick unlike any other. Brick that enhances every project, any project, and lends modern looks to a classic material. Brick that outdoes every other. Handmade brick by Glen-Gery. Character beyond compare.
Good afternoon, everybody. Darryl, if you could please share your screen with us. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Demystifying Masonry Anchors, a guide to getting it right every time, with our Sales Accessories Manager, Darryl Kegley. My name is Brian Yansak, and I am the Design Studio and Events Coordinator for Glen-Gery. During the presentation, you will notice the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to submit any questions throughout the presentation, and they will be answered at its conclusion. Your attendance will be marked, and we ask that you stay on for the duration of the presentation to receive credit. Everyone attending the course will be receiving a certificate of completion within the next 2 business days as well. Those who provided their AIA number during registration will be submitted for AIA credit. If you are participating but did not register and wish to receive AIA credit, please email events@glengery.com. That is events@glengery.com with your information, and I'll be happy to submit for you. Today's session will also be recorded, and a link for you to access it will be provided within your certificate of completion. I would also like to remind everybody that this is the last webinar of Glen-Gery's summer webinar series, but we do invite you to reach out to schedule private webinars for your firm if you would like. I would now like to introduce our speaker today, Darryl Kegley. Darryl has over 38 years of experience in the construction industry, with his expertise in masonry, specification review, air barriers, cavity wall construction, educational support training of masonry in Division 4 and part of Division 7, and troubleshooting for one of the leading suppliers of masonry products in the industry. Darryl has completed training in the International Masonry Institute in Bowie, Maryland, and has been on the board of Masonry Construction Association of Central Pennsylvania for the last 4 years. And with that, I'll now turn it over to you, Darryl.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you guys for joining us today. As Brian mentioned, this is our last summer event that we are going to have, but there will be more chances to do this one-on-one or with your own office. So please take us up on that. I will give some more information about that towards the end of this presentation. Today, as Brian said, we're going to basically demystify masonry anchors. That name was given to the presentation by a couple of my cohorts, and I thought it was kind of cute, and it really means a lot to me because we want to get down into understanding what's the difference of anchoring masonry there is, especially when we're talking about insulations, air barriers, and other things that are in the cavity wall that makes up the difference. This presentation is copyrighted. As you can see on the screen, you'll see the information there. Glen-Gery is a registered provider with the American Institute of Architects Continuing Educations. You will get your credits, as Brian said, once you stay on and complete this course, and we'll be glad to do that. Also, at the end of the course, I would appreciate if everybody would like to stay on and learn a little more about Glen-Gery. I'll go into that right after the AIA portion of this presentation. Glen-Gery provides design professionals, as you can see on the screen, numerous chances of products, but mainly we also offer a lot of support. We want to help the design community as well as the construction community with all their technical issues, questions, or anything else they have with masonry. We are embedded into the masonry industry. Today we're going to start off by talking about proper anchoring of masonry walls. Keep in mind the screen we're at this here, because you'll see a couple of the blow-ups of this, and I'll go into details about them as we go through the presentation. But I just want you to keep in mind some of the details that's on this screen here. The learning objectives today is to review appropriate anchors and ties and methods of anchoring masonry to wood and steel studs, identify proper anchors for masonry and continuous insulation, discuss options for anchoring full bed depth stone veneer to stud and CMU backup, and compare anchor designs and options for attachments for masonry veneer to CMU and concrete construction. Some of the resources that I've pulled from for some of the information today, you'll see is definitely from the building code requirements book on this page. I use that a lot when I'm looking back at for some of the specifications that I review and go back and look and make sure that everything's going to match up to code. So the first part we're going to discuss today is going to be anchors for wood or steel stud with no cavity wall insulation. So basically in this situation, we're going to have a steel stud or backup with some type of sheathing on the front of it, and it's going to be an airspace and some type of masonry veneer on there. It can be a brick, it can be a block, it could be anything masonry that we're going to tie into it. As we've gone through in some of our other presentations, keep in mind the recommended airspace is going to be 2 inches. And that's what we prefer to see. The minimum you have to have is definitely going to be a 1 inch. And in most areas, the 2016 TMS, which is part of the 2018 IBC building codes, the new code is actually 6 5/8 for the cavity from the back of your substrate to the face of your wall. As you can see here, I have on there that's going to be required is going to be a 4.5 inches. That, if you're not specifying to meet that TMS code in the 2018 IBC, then you're still using the 4.5 inches. All the ties that you'll see today can be used in either situation depending on where you're specifying. So the first thing we'll start off with is something everybody's very familiar with, and that's the corrugated wall ties. We used to see these years ago when we did all of our residential construction. You still see them some in residential construction. But again, the corrugated wall tie, once we started realizing about masonry and masonry construction, we realized that did not allow for any movement in our walls. So the rigid steel of that product, it keeps a lot of things tied perfectly to the substrate behind, but again, doesn't allow for any movement. So if you're going to get movement in that wall, sometimes when you have a rigid tie like that that does not allow for any movement, you're going to wind up with cracking in your masonry. Not all the time, but it can happen. The other thing you want to keep in mind too, the corrugated wall tie is used for wood studs only. You cannot use these onto steel stud backup. Of course, this picture showing a detail where we've got a commercial building where you actually have some type of wall tie, whether it's, I believe it's a corrugated wall tie in each one, and they're using these to tie in the brick veneer on that. You should not specify a corrugated wall tie in this situation. A lot of times when I do spec reviews, you'll see it in the tie section that there's several ties listed. And one thing you want to always try to keep in mind is to try to eliminate allowing the corrugated wall tie to come out of master spec and put into that specification, because they should not be used in this situation or in most all commercial construction. You still can use them in residential construction with wood studs if you choose to. So again, the ties, you always want to make sure they're going to be compatible and work with your air and water barriers and your weather resistant barriers. The biggest thing there, if you notice on the screen where the scaffold is with the block backup, the that's a hook and eye system, which we'll show further into the presentation. And when they're spraying the wall, they're able to spray all around that eye and pintle part of it where it's going to tie into the brick, so you get a complete seal on that. On the other opposite side of that, where you've got a veneer situation, you've got a tie that's either mounted onto the outside of the sheathing, or if this case had insulation in it, it could be on the outside, and you want to make sure then it's going to properly seal around that penetrations too. So you've got screws going into the veneer tie, and you want to make sure that's sealed as well with your air barrier. In this situation we've got here, you've got a spray applied air barrier almost similar to the screen we had previous. And if you look in the small one that I've got my mouse on right there, notice the pintle coming out of that, and that air barrier is being able to be sealed as it's sprayed or brushed, depending on which way it's applied in terms of doing that. If you look at the opposite side of this, you've got it being put on, and now look on the outside of that. That is not a complete seal all the way around there. And you penetrated it with the screw going in there. Now, hopefully that screw has a washer to basically seal that part of the penetration, but you really want to seal all the way around that part of the tie as well. And then on the left-hand side, you'll notice that they've sealed the whole entire wall and started to put up their cavity wall insulation to give it a CI effect with the continuous insulation as well as your air barrier in this situation. So veneer ties for steel or wood studs with no insulation. Main thing you want to make sure they're always the objective in this situation is provide the connection, transfer the lateral loads, and again, permit in the plane movement between the brick and your exterior, or your substrate for your wall in terms of doing that. And one of your main functions in this that I like to see is getting that adjustability. So each tie that you see in this allows for some adjustability going up and down when you do get that movement. In a corrugated wall tie situation, you have no movement in that veneer tie. All of these ties can be used with different airspace situations with no insulation. And all you're going to do is make that adjustment with the tie that gets mounted into the barrel or into the plate that gets mounted onto the substrate itself. So one thing you'll always want to do when you're specifying, and you're doing this, make sure you spell out the type of tie that you want to use that's going to give you that movement, also transfer those lateral loads, and provide that connection into your wall. So there's in the stud wall, we've got in this situation, you've got a wood stud here, you've got a steel stud here. This particular tie allows for movement going up and down, as I spoke about before, and we do it as same as here. The biggest thing you're going to see the difference on this, again, we've got them both mounted after the fact of either it's going to be a sheet applied or spray applied air barrier. So again, you want to make sure that you're going to mount this tie with a screw that is going to be sealing that penetration once it goes through both your air barrier, your gyp board, and into your stud. In this situation, it's done the same thing in here, and you've got a gyp board right on top of the steel stud. So you do want to make sure that that's going to seal, and then it allows for the movement vertically going up and down. My main point on this here, you can use these ties with either a CMU, you can use them with a brick veneer. It does not matter. Again, the adjustment's going to be made in the tie part itself when they order in the field. Adjustable ties with cavity walls, insulated cavity walls. Again, we're going to do the same thing we did on the previous slide, except in these different situations, you've got ties that are going to be mounted with insulation. So you're going to see in a screen coming up, I call them an inboard tie or an outboard tie. Again, that's not a technical term, but what you're doing is you're either going on the outside of that insulation or you're going on the inside of the insulation. So in this situation here and here, the insulation will be on the inside. And when you're doing that, you're going to have to mount that insulation in 16-inch wide pieces, which is going to not allow you to cover an area and have twice as many joints in your wall. All the ties here, again, once they penetrate the insulation here on the outboard or on the inboard, you will have to still put a tie into that to tie your substrate back to it, transfer your loads back to the building. Now, in larger cavities, in some areas you'll get into cavities. I do go sometimes in further north when you start to see larger cavities with somewhere around 5 and 6 inch mineral wool. Sometimes you will see the ties actually change from a 3/16 to a 1/4 inch. That's very rare, but you can see that depending on that width of that cavity. And again, I want to go through the 4.5 to where everybody understands the 4.5 and the 6 5/8 part of it, because that is critical in when you're designing those buildings. And again, it's if you're designing with a 2016 TMS, which is part of the 2018 IBC building code, you can do it with a 6 5/8 overall without having to have that tie engineered. Now, if you're not, and you're still in a code prior to that, you're still going to be 4.5 inches. So if you do that, that tie will have to be engineered anything over 4.5 inches. So as I mentioned a minute ago, we're going to discuss the ties inboard and outboard. And if you'll notice here, here's your cavity wall insulation in both situations. Here you have an outboard tie, which is going to allow you to put that full sheet of insulation on there covering 32 square feet instead of a tie that's inboard that's only going to allow you to put a sheet of insulation at 16 inches height, which is only covering 10.67 square feet at a time. You're having 3 times the amount of joints in your wall in one sheet of insulation using the inboard tie versus the outboard tie. So if you're trying to establish CI or as close as you can to continuous insulation, you seriously should look at specifying a tie that's going to be mounted onto the outside, or I call an outboard tie. But again, you want to make sure that's going to seal that penetration with it as well. The other thing that you're looking at here, a lot of times on the inboard ties, if there are an air barriers on the inside of that, you're more than likely penetrating that air barrier at least twice just to mount that plate on by mounting it with 2 screws. In this situation, you're only penetrating your air barrier 1 time, and that's it. So that's another benefit to using the barrel type ties and an outboard tie in your wall. So in this situation, I basically detailed the 2. And if you'll notice the situation, you've got it here again, the inboard tie. Notice the insulation is going to be 16. Here they're actually penetrating the insulation with the tie to try to get a larger sheet on there to cover 32 square feet. Now you just penetrated the entire there with the width of that, and now you've got an issue of trying to seal the tie there. That's not going to work either. And in this situation, they've basically done the same thing, but they did it with an outboard tie, and now they can put a larger piece on and do that. So you could have done this tie on this side here, covered it, and you would not have to worry about sealing that larger void that you're making when you put that masonry tie right through the cavity wall insulation. The other thing that's coming across lately is a lot of the thermal breaks. And in terms of that, they do manufacture ties that allow for the thermal conductivity. And you'll see here, you've got one. This tie is made without the plastic. But if you notice, this one's coated completely from the barrel, top of the barrel, all the way right to the end of the seal that's going to be up against your air barrier. And that is also a thermal tie. You have no thermal and the ties that we have on the left-hand side of the screen. So we talk about ties and tying your veneers back to your substrates. With all the different types of insulations, that also affects the type of tie you're going to use. You've got mineral wool insulations that are on the market today. Most of them in a cavity wall are most time 16 inches wide or 24 inches wide. Most of your XPSs or extruded polystyrene are all 4x8s, or they are scored for 16 to be snapped 16 inches on center, and you can put those in between the inboard ties if you have to use them there. Then you also have polyisos, which are polyisocyanurates that also can be put into 16-inch pieces or a 4x8 sheet as well. So again, when you're looking at all the different types of insulations, you need to make sure the tie is going to also work with it. You also, of course, have spray foam, which is one of the products that's going to give you the higher R value that's in the market. And also, depending on the situation and how it's applied, a lot of times that's going to also be your air barrier as well as your insulation. But again, you need to make sure you're using the proper tie with spray foam insulation, or you're going to have troubles there, because if you're using an outboard tie that penetrates and does not seal, then you've just voided your air barrier on that wall. So as I mentioned earlier, this was in the very initial slide that I had on it. This is the full size of it. Notice the outboard tie here. And if you notice, and if you can see the close up on them, here the tie's not even flush to the insulation. Here it looks like it's flush there. Again, it doesn't look like it's flush here. This tie is going to also be an outboard tie, but it's also a tie that you're penetrating your insulation and your air barriers. At the end of this tie, it's got prongs. So you've got 2 here, 2 here, we're up to 4. And now screw top and bottom, you've just penetrated that insulation and the air barrier on the other side of that 6 times. Now, the one thing they did to try to help seal that penetration, they put tape on the inside. That's not really doing any good there. You got to make sure that if you're going to use a tie like this, you need to have the tape on the outside of the insulation to when it penetrates it seals around the pieces going through the insulation and into the joints, as well as around the plate and around your screws. So again, there's outboard ties that are out there that over time, we've learned that we can also use other products that will give you CI and not penetrate your insulation and air barriers too many times. So we want to be conscious of what type of tie we're putting into the specifications. In reviewing a lot of specifications for builders, designers, contractors, one of the things we always try to come up with is options to something like this. Tie's structurally it's fine, but to penetrate so many times into the wall and to leave a void like this, we would rather see that an outboard tie that's going to penetrate less and be tight into that wall up against the insulation. So in this slide, you've got spray foam on both of these jobs. These are actually two different jobs that I took pictures from that I've been on. And if you notice in this situation, the inboard tie would have worked, but the one thing with spray foam, if you've worked with it or specified it, and I'm sure you know, once you spray that and it starts to cure, it also grows so that it starts to expand once it starts to cure. And if your tie is exactly the width of whatever your spray foam is, a lot of times you're going to it's going to cover where the pintle or the tie goes in to tie your brick back to your wall. You really want to add a little bit extra to that. So if this was 2 inches, I would be specifying a tie to be used in this situation. As long as I have at least an inch or more airspace, I would make that tie at least a 2.5, to where that would allow my insulation to do that. And then I'm not digging into the insulation and jeopardizing the warranty with it, and mainly tearing the face right off of it, trying to get my masonry tie into it. If you notice what they've done here, they actually did penetrate it and tore it up, and they took spray foam in a can and tried to seal around the tie in that cavity wall. So in this situation, we've got the outboard ties, as I've been talking about a lot in doing this. If you notice, you've got two different types here. Both are barrel types. If you notice, this one here in this picture allows for a lot more adjustment up and down than the one on the left-hand side, or excuse me, right-hand side of the screen. But it also does the same effect as this one by sealing right here at the front of your insulation, and the last seal is right up against the sheathing here. It's going to be right there, and it'll seal right where that air barrier is going to be, as well as the gypboard itself. This tie, again, it will allow for a much larger cavity because of the strength of the tie. And then this one here, it does not allow for as much adjustment, but the tie itself can also be extended into wider airspace as well. Main thing, notice in this situation, you've got a better chance of achieving CI, or continuous insulation, with this tie, because now you're not putting 16-inch wide pieces every time and either having to tape or seal those joints. And again, this tie itself here has also the plastic around the barrel part of it here, and that helps with a thermal break. Also, the barrel of this particular tie is made out of stainless, which also helps. So inboard tie with insulation, and in this situation, again, you've got a mineral wool insulation. What they've done here, you've got your sheet air barrier on the wall. They did put the tape on the outside of that, and then they did put the screws on that does have you can see the black around those. Those are the washers that's going to help seal that penetration once it goes in. So this is a decent inboard tie, and this is the same tie that also was on the wall in this situation. And that's why I said you could actually have that tie just a little bit longer, where that opening there to allow the tie to go into it would be out a little further, and you would still get the full depth of your insulation without any damage to it by putting the tie in. Again, this is mineral wool. It's probably going to be 16 or 24 inches. All the ties that I've shown so far today, with the exception of one, and I'll go back to that in a little bit, it can be spaced at 16/24 on center. All the ties in the presentation that I'm showing so far are going to be a 16/16 spacing. So here's a little comparison I put together for the inboard, outboard type of it. Again, we go through the inboard. Again, you're doing that, you must use a 16-inch wide sheet. It's only 10.67. You're causing yourself more joints. Works better with spray foam in insulations and cavities, as I mentioned prior, and it costs less for the material, but your labor itself is going to cost you more, because you're asking your contractor to go back now after putting your board insulation in and either taping or sealing all of those joints. So on the opposite side, you've got the outboard tie. If you're using a sheet insulation, allows for 32 square feet at a time, 2 times as less joints, and then it will also seal your penetrations when you're putting the tie into the insulation as well as through the air barrier, and this should cost you less in labor as well. Now, and mainly in material cost also in the long run on the job itself. So anchoring full bed depth stone to steel studs, there are a number of options out in the market. You'll see a lot of times, depending on the job and the height of the walls, you'll see a lot of times when you have large projects in terms of this, you'll have this product here, which this tie is similar to the tie we've seen in the previous slide for the single white walls, or it's not single white, but the brick veneers, and you're using the pintle here. The only difference is you're allowing a rod to go down into the tie, and then this tie will slide up and down there, considering this doesn't hit on coursing like a normal brick tie does. Now, the other thing you can do as well, if you're doing stone or even precast in situations, you can use the barrel ties, as I shown earlier, is that if you're going through outboard tie with insulation, and then they do make an anchor or tie that goes into it that will either go up into the bottom of the first course or the second course of your stone, and well as tie in your first course and the second and first course there. This is more of a precast here, where you'd have the grooves into the precast, and then you'd anchor that into it, and that would be epoxy then to that precast. But they do make adjustable ties, is what my main thing to go over here is, because a lot of times I see in specifications, you'll see stone anchors that they want them to use, but when you're doing full bed depth and you get the random sizing of the stone, you want to make sure there's something that's going to be able to hit the coursing that you need to at each time. So if you notice here, you're hitting at this, and your next time you're going to hit right there on that course. So you do allow for that adjustment up and down that rod. Again, with anchoring to full bed depth stone to CMU, again, you can use the same tie here. The difference is this end of this tie is going to be a Tapcon end to go into your CMU, but it still will work with cavity wall insulation. You'll seal that penetration outside with the washer right here. And in terms of that, this is the same effect that the previous slide showed going on to studs, except it's now working with wall reinforcement, and it has the adjustable ties on it going up and down. The other thing you can do with this, you can order this with a lock bar triangle, which what that'll do is lock into that at that point, and you can stop it from going too far up and too far down. So anchoring masonry to concrete or masonry CMU, you've got several products that are out on the market today that's been there for a long time. The hook and eye system with wall reinforcement has been around for at least 20 years, if not more, that I've been in the business. And again, that works, and it goes into the block every 16 inches and allows for you to put your cavity wall insulation into that. One of the things you're seeing more and more today, because we're trying to establish the CI, now what you'll see today is you'll see a lot of the veneer ties that I've shown in the previous slide, and you'll put wall reinforcement into your CMU, but then you'll put your board insulation on and use an outboard tie, which again is eliminating having to use 16-inch wide pieces of insulation and make it work better for that. So again, you're getting closer to CI with doing a tie that way, and then you're still getting your reinforce into your CMU. That I see a lot more of. I've just recently worked with an architect and designed a building that way, and now he was able to go and put the insulation. He went with a polyiso in the cavity walls, and he covered his 32 square feet, and we at least saved the guy on the field, at least he said a half a day just going back and at least sealing all the joints and everything in the 16-inch wide pieces. On this side, of course, we're talking concrete versus CMU. These are, of course, what they call dovetail slots. They do make what we call an anchor that goes into that as well too. A lot of times I see though on projects that's in the specifications, it shows up on the drawings. The concrete guy gets out in the field, he pours the wall and no dovetail slots. Again, you have the option of going to a tie like this, as long as you have that 1 inch or more airspace. You can tie that back into concrete. It will go into concrete or CMU. And then if you had insulation into the wall, it would allow you again to tie your insulation in the wall and cover that. A lot of times you don't have insulation where this is. If that's the case, there are other ties that you can mount onto the concrete and tie right back into the brick. Joint reinforcement and CMU backup, there's two types of reinforcements that's out there and have been forever: ladder and truss. Of course, when we first started into this business, we always were specifying truss, and then we started grouting walls and putting a lot of steel into them. So we've gone more and more to ladder. You're not losing strength when it comes to the two of those. Believe it or not, the ladder is almost as strong as what the truss is. And if you've got reinforcing going into this cavity, or excuse me, into the core, that's going to be hitting that right there. And then you could have a chance of galvanic reaction and doing that. The other thing is, if you're grouting that and usually dropping it about 3 and 4 feet at a time, if you've got a rod going through there, you're basically causing a void in that wall right there. It's not going to be a large one, but it does, the concrete will hit it and start just going on both sides of it, and you won't completely seal around that. And that's actually where your rebar is going to be, right in the center of that wall. You've got gauges on standard wire is going to be what they consider 9 gauge or 0.148 by 148. Extra heavy duty is 3/16 cross and 9 gauge side rods. That's 0.1875 by 0.148. And then super heavy duty, which is 3/16 by 3/16 or 0.1875 by 0.1875. That's a tight joint when you're thinking about a 3/8 inch mortar joint and putting a super heavy duty wire going continuously across that wall. It's basically taking up a large portion of your mortar joint, not allowing for complete bonding. And I have a slide to show you that shortly as well too. The finishes, mill galvanized, mainly used in interior only. Today, again, things have changed so much to where you see mostly hot dip in interior and exterior. You have stainless steel type 304, and then again for the marine and some of the chemical areas, if you do have a 3/16 that is a special order product that can be used. Most of the time your standard stainless steel is going to be a 304. When you're specifying your wire in the specifications for your project, just please spell out the gauges, and please make sure that you are putting it, if you want to go with mill galvanized, that you're telling them that you want that interior only and hot dip for all your exterior walls as well. So here's a slide I was talking about briefly against previous one. This is the one we have a struggle with, because if you look at the diameter of this right there on a standard 3/8 inch joint, and you have a 3/16 rod going straight across it all the way down that wall, you're causing some problems with bonding sometimes in that. Not all the time. And again, some joints are even larger than 3/8. So if you have a larger joint than 3/8, you're good. But if you have a standard wall and you have a 3/8 inch joint on that, I would highly recommend you checking with your engineer, or calling somebody like ourselves or someone else that can help you with some of the manufacturers to give you the information you need to decide whether you have to put in a 3/16 all the way across. Master spec, the sad thing about them, I think it's in there almost every time, because the last 15 jobs I think I've looked at, it's in the specifications, and most of them we've been able to go back and look at and still give the engineer what they needed with the standard 9 gauge, or even going to a 3/16 by 9 in the worst case scenario. So please make sure that you're aware of that when you are putting your specs into your job site, and just verifying whether you really have to have a 3/16 by 3/16 in that joint. So on multi-width walls, we talked about that. That's where you're going to have especially in a veneer type situation, a cavity wall, airspace, or something of there. As I mentioned earlier, truss definitely restricts the plane of the differential movement between the whites. The other thing I want to really stress is everything almost gets grouted again, and again the rebar. Went over that earlier, but think about that when you're looking at your specifications in terms of doing that, because again, a lot of times just because Master Spec had it in there, they'll put the truss right in there and not notice that you could go to ladder in that situation. There's the rebar placement we were talking about. In terms of that, it's right out of the tech note for the MCMAs. It has that in there. And again, truss type joint reinforcement should not be used in reinforced or grouted walls. Again, my main concern is that rebar in there and then that void going there, because your bar is going to be right into that that joint there, and you're usually going to have the void right where the rebar is going to be placed. So masonry veneer ties to concrete. As I mentioned earlier on the one slide, I showed you the dovetail slot. Again, there's a tie that would work into that and also give you some flexibility going up and down on movement. And there's the tie I also spoke about that would go into concrete and could be an outboard tie and be able to tie in insulation if you had insulation in that area. And the other thing is you can also have situations where you're doing a retro or you're trying to tie into a concrete wall that was an existing. You can put a tie like this into that has the expansion bolt into it, and that will also work as well too. But notice it is going to be an inboard tie, so if you have insulation in that, just plan on using 16-inch wide pieces there. A standard veneer tie that's normally used on a wood or steel stud could be used in that situation. You would have to Tapcon top and bottom into that, and then you could hook the triangle tie to it, and then that would allow you to tie your substrate back into the wall. A lot of times I get a question simple as this: is either one of the dovetails better than the other? You'll see some people specify the flexibles, some people specify the corrugated. The only thing I'm going to say in this situation, you can use either one, but again, if you want the movement instead of the rigid, like we talked about earlier with the corrugated wall ties, I would definitely look at putting a tie in this situation in. Column anchors to masonry. A lot of times you have a CMU backup that's going to run right next to that column, and you need to tie that into it. There's column anchors like this, as well as wire column anchors. Either one can be used. Again, just specify what you prefer in that situation. Again, you get the flat corrugated ones that are again going to be usually 12 or 14 gauge. This is usually going to be a 3/16 in diameter rod. Either one of them can be used in this situation. Most of the time you see the ones with the flat like that, and again, allows for the bonding purposes. This situation you see a lot of times when they're tying the wall back at an intersecting of a beam, or also you'll see a lot of the steel guys when you've got CMU walls coming into the columns, they'll tie those in with the same thing with the weld-ons already being put onto the steel prior to the mason coming out, and then he just hooks his triangle right to it, and then he's able to tie that in. So basically, just summary of the presentation today. And again, it was a brief analogy of what you've got options out there in masonry veneer ties. The main thing is you want to always understand and know that, of course, we're trying to provide a connection. We're trying to provide a way to transfer the lateral loads back to the buildings. We're trying to permit and plane movement to accommodate differential movements, in some cases restrain differential movements. So there's several things going on in that situation. The main thing is also to understand too, as in joint reinforcement, one thing doesn't fit all. So you've got in different areas, you might be able to use a tie that's going to be an outboard tie. Some situations you might have to use an inboard tie. But for that reason, you still want to make sure that you look out and see what you've got onto that drawing, and you make sure it's going to work with your air barrier, your insulation, and of course, whatever you're tying into. So again, they need to make sure that everybody works together in the wall happy. Let's make sure the one thing, it's easy to install. That's one of my pet peeves, because again, my father had a construction company. You want to make sure that it's going to work easy into the field with the contractor, because if he can put it in or she can put it in, then you know you're going to get a quality job when the installation's done. You want to give your client the best possible building out there and making sure they use the proper products, but the main thing that it can be installed easy in the field, and then you know it's going to be done properly. I want to thank you guys today, and make sure that you also know that at Glen-Gery, we do specification reviews on Division 4 and 7, as well as working on the ties and anchors. We cover the insulations, cavity wall flashings. We also do stone anchors in terms of that, rigid metals, in terms of flashings, flexibles, membranes, all types of products that are out there. And of course, at Glen-Gery, we also do spec reviews for our thin brick systems. We have a whole team that works on that. And then, of course, we also are willing to work with you on your full bed depth reviews too. If you have a situation, we have a gentleman that does nothing but shapes and drawings for the job sites, and he is more than welcome. If you have questions about a shape that needs help on, make sure you reach out to us in terms of your job sites, because we can work with you on all the projects you're working on it with masonry on it. So I just want to reach out and see if today we had some questions. Brian, are you there?
I am. We do have 2 questions so far. First one from Eric. As cavities increase in dimension and you need to have a 1/4 inch DIA tie that has to sit in a normal nominal bed of mortar that is only 3/8 inches, lack of bond is now an issue. How is this addressed?
Well, that's exactly what we just talked about in terms of that 3/16 in terms of that. With the ties today, because of the code change and the increase of that, we are getting away with 3/16 instead of a 1/4 inch diameter tie. So please reach out to us in that situation, because when they started seeing the code change coming, the manufacturer started doing the testing with a 3/16 and eliminating to try to get away from the 1/4 inch, because you are correct, it does cause problems. So again, in that situation, there are options out there that we can try to work with you on in terms of doing that. If you want to go into more depth on that, I've got some more information that I can send you. Please send Brian your email information, and I'll definitely give you I've got some pamphlets and stuff that I can send over to help you out with that situation.
All right, next question is from Gail. Which type of insulation works the best with brickwork?
Well, they all work fine with brick. Its main thing is what you're trying to achieve in your R value. When I showed it earlier, you've got a spray foam insulation that again gives you the highest R value. Your mineral wools, again, I'm sure everybody's familiar with what they call NFPA 285, which is the fire code. A lot of insulations have struggled in the past with that. Most of them are up to par today. But the mineral wools that are on the street today, the problem with them, you're only getting a 4.2 per inch out of them. So when you start to put a mineral wool in and you do that, sometimes you wind up with 4 and 5 inches of insulation. Now we're really increasing the cavity. So sometimes you might want to take a look at a situation and see if you could change that same insulation for a polyiso and shrink it down. You shrink your whole wall down and use that when you're getting an R6 per inch, and then you could still probably achieve the same R value that you're looking at with a thinner insulation, smaller footing at the base, and everything else too, and maybe save on the whole entire project. All the products are good. They all got their benefits. And again, most of them today, excluding some of the XPSs in terms of the NFPA 285, again, they still pass in some wall cases, but you'd have to check and make sure that it's going to pass the NFPA 285 with your wall design.
And we have another question from Les. Can you address any issues and solutions you've encountered with foam insulations and meeting NFPA 285?
Well, yes. So solutions are just like I mentioned just prior. The biggest problem I have in that situation, we want to make sure that, first of all, what you're trying to achieve, let's talk about your R values first, then try to fit the right product to that. Then we can try to solve the problems. Spray foam, again, like I said, is an excellent product. But again, when we're specifying spray foam, we have to make sure that we're also specifying the appropriate flashing, because the material does get hot as it cures. Again, we want to specify the appropriate tie because of the way the system works with the insulation. As it cures, it also expands. So you do not want that. I've actually had jobs where they put the barrel ties on first, they sprayed the foam, it cured, and they couldn't even find the ties. So I've got pictures where they didn't look like it's tying a wall. So again, all the situations there, I would look at always trying to accommodate what you're trying to achieve first with your R value in your wall and work yourself backwards that way. And then again, you can see in terms of what proper tie you should use, what flashing you should use, and everything else will go in place, especially when it comes to insulations, because they all have their challenges.
Okay, another question. Any idea of life expectancy of the composite components of the thermal break member of the anchors? Composites meaning non-metal.
Correct. So that's been brought up. The tie has not been on the market long enough to really give you a great answer on that. I do know the barrel tie that I've talked about that had the piece that the pintle goes into it, which was the wing, I call it, in terms of that particular one. That one has been tested, okay, and also tested in the NFPA 285 test when they set the wall on fire, and it did pass that test. But the barrel tie, I know they've also tested it as well. But again, these are things that are all relatively new to the market. So there's not a lot of history with them, with the products like that. But if you do want to get the information on them, please again email Brian, and he'll get the information. I'll be glad to pass on the testing that we have for those proper ties that show that they are a thermal break.
And our last question for today from Ian: should I be using different wall ties when switching from 4-inch CMU brick ledge to brick veneer?
4-inch CMU brick. No. You could, any of the ties that I showed you today, you should be fine in that situation without any doubt. And again, all of the ties will tie in full bed depth stones. They'll tie in block. They'll tie in brick. The difference, if you had a wall and you were doing, say it was a stud wall with chipboard and 4 inches of insulation, and then you had your airspace, and then you were tying in a 6-inch split face CMU, you could still tie in with the same tie. We would change the tie itself that hooks into it. And what I mean by changing it, we go to the longer piece because we want to go into that at least 2/3 of whatever the width of that product is to tie it in. The barrel itself has been tested and strong enough to go back into the wall, and you're still transferring your load back to the face of the building.
All right, thank you, Darryl. Well, that concludes our official AIA portion of the presentation. Like we mentioned before, if you'd like to stay on the line for a few extra minutes so Darryl can go through Glen-Gery Brickworks and the products that we have to offer. I also would like to remind everybody that they will be receiving their certificate of completion within the next 2 business days. Darryl's contact information will also be on that certificate in case that you would like to reach out and ask him any further questions. And the link to today's recording will also be available. Another reminder that today does mark the last webinar of Glen-Gery's summer webinar series, and to please reach out to events@glengery.com if there are any webinars through the series that you would like to make a private webinar schedule for. And with that, I'll take it back to you, Darryl.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you guys for staying on. Just want to give you a little history on Glen-Gery and Brickworks, and then also go through some of the products that we have to offer. Brickworks was formed back in 1934, headquartered in Sydney, Australia. They acquired Glen-Gery back in 2018. Glen-Gery was founded in 1890. We're one of the nation's largest manufacturers of brick, as well as we are now starting to supply so many other products, as you will see on slides to come. We also have a stone manufacturing facility in Kentucky, and we have products that are sold nationally through networks as well as direct, and throughout 500 distributors, as well as in Canada. So again, we have a very deep arsenal of products to help you design your buildings today. And again, we can also, of course, help you with everything behind the wall as well. On this map, you'll notice, you'll see the plants in some of the masonry supply centers that Brickworks owns in the United States under the Brickworks North American Group. And again, you'll see today I'm sitting in the Harrisburg Masonry Supply Center right now in Pennsylvania. And then we also have offices all the way out in the Midwest. Brickworks, of course, has made acquisitions since they acquired Glen-Gery. And you'll see that we've done nothing but grow since. And then, of course, you'll see as we go through the slides today with other products that we are continually growing. So Somo is a product that gives you that sleek linear look. It's twice the standard brick length. And as you can see, the look in this building is just gorgeous. In this product here, it's now available through the US and through North America through Glen-Gery. And again, this is sold as part of Glen-Gery's international collection. They have several products in there that I'll go through as I keep going through the slides. But again, reach out to your local architectural sales rep or some of your people on the BDM teams at Glen-Gery and ask questions about that. We have plenty of brochures and information on this product. And let us see if this doesn't fit one of your next designs. Venetian glass. This is a product that was shaped by the Italian artistry. Again, this gives you a brilliant look. If you're just looking to do the inside and do a retaining wall or around your desk at your when the people come into your, say, a hotel or something of that nature, it can also be structurally done as well too, as Chanel did in a building in Amsterdam. Of course, it comes in different colors. And again, this is sold as part of Glen-Gery's international collection. These are the clay coats. This is one of Glen-Gery's staples of one of their plants that they've had for a long time in Pennsylvania. The Hanley plant. Again, you see the rich colors that they have at this plant as well too. The clay coats are breathable, meaning liquids and vapors can pass through it. It's a permeable surface. And again, without damaging the exterior appearance of your building. York Handmade. This is actually a true handmade product. Again, this is more than over 130 years of experience of us manufacturing these products. We're one of the largest and most trusted in the handmade part of the industry. That is manufactured in York, Pennsylvania. And again, it's true handmade product. If you really want to get some unique looks, go to our website and see all the different colors and options we have, or reach out to one of the local sales reps in your area. Roman Maximus, again, gives you that long look. It's a 3 5/8 by 1 5/8 by 23 5/8, and lays about 3 brick per square. You know, you're always trying to increase and be different in your designs and your looks. You know, and this is definitely something that'll work for you. Again, this is something that is being sold through Glen-Gery in North America. Glen-Gery is just not a brick manufacturer. We do also do stone. Now, this is a stone product that we are a distributor for in the United States. And again, Creative Minds is part of their focus, trying to be the leading edge of the interior and exterior wall solutions in the stone business. And again, they have some unique designs as well too that we have to offer. This again, I can't say it enough to reach out and talk to your local architectural sales rep or even your local distributor for Glen-Gery about Creative Minds, because this is something that we offer through all of our locations as well. Landmark is our location that we have. And again, we've got that stocked in most of our MSC locations. So whether you're building a house or you're doing a commercial building, don't hesitate to come to us for your stone needs. And if you have designs or questions about what can we do to help you in a solution on a project, we're there for you to help as well too. This is one of my favorites. There's a lot of pavers in the industry today that, of course, have been out for years, the concrete pavers, but there's nothing like a brick paver to take the look of your house and make it different. That's the walkway into my house. I'd love love it to be the one on the left, but it's not. But I use pavers throughout my house in the back and the front. Again, we've got so many options there. Don't hesitate to give us a call and see if we can't come up with a solution for your next project on that. Feldhaus is a unique product for us too. That's a German-made thin brick that we distribute in the United States as well. It's a century and a half of brick making with the expertise that they have in there. It's got a wide range of colors and textures and clay bodies that we have out in the market. There's there's sales rep Jay. You'll see him on one of the slides coming up. If you want his contact information or need help with anything on Feldhaus, email me and I'll make sure Jay reaches out to you. He knows the systems inside and out, and he's a good resource to help you in your designs. Thin brick products have done nothing but grow over the years, and during a recent acquisition, we were able to acquire this part of a product called True Bricks. It's a system just like one of our other systems we have. It's unique in the sense that what the brick does is it actually locks into the channels, as you can see in the pictures here. In terms of that, the brick are actually grooved and put right into the channels. And then you've got the gun up there, of course, and you can go back and just mortar your joints in and put that on there. This can be done with insulation behind it. It can be done right onto your house. It can be done right on top of the exterior. A lot of times you see a lot of the commercial retail areas that want to put brick on the front of the buildings and not want to put full bed depth. Definitely consider something in this situation be done. Again, we have people at Glen-Gery that can help you with the design, any of the technical help. There's a gentleman, Mike, down at one of our locations that, again, is a specialty in this, and he's willing to answer your questions, help you work through your design, help you solve any questions or issues that you think you might have. This is our other thin brick product system that we've had. Again, it's a staple of Glen-Gery, and we've had it for a long time. This is a panel system. And again, just like the previous system, it'll work with your thin brick. In this situation, the brick don't have to be grooved. They're just a thin brick. And if you see the tabs that are right there on the plates, what they'll do is that brick will sit right on there. They get glued onto there. And then as soon as you mortar the joints, all that mechanically bonds into each other, bonding the brick and everything else up to that panel. Again, this can be used with insulation behind it too. And we've got people on staff that will definitely work through your designs and questions you have on this. This building is actually a building in Reading, Pennsylvania, where they decided just to redo the side of the building. And of course they used ThinTech on it and to do that. And as you look at the building, you can't even tell that it's even a thin system. What I've been talking about for the last hour or so, of course, accessories. That's what I specialize in at Glen-Gery, and as well as a gentleman by the name of Ben Safran down in the DC market. But everybody at Glen-Gery will be more than happy to help you. You can reach out to them, and if they can't answer it, we'll be glad to help and assist in that. But again, anything behind your walls, we'll be glad to do spec reviews for free. Make sure the products are compatible before they ever go to bid. And you know yourself that when it hits the streets, then you don't have any questions coming from the contractors, whether the products work together or not in a wall. We'll be more than happy to do that for you. This is a team that I'm part of, led by Laura Robinson, as you see on the screen. And some of the people I've been talking about today, there's Jay Morrison. And again, he handles a lot of the thin wall systems in terms of that. There's good looking Mike down there on the end there, the True Bricks guy. And again, Brian today's on there as well, but this is a group that works together very strongly. And again, you can reach out to any of them and they'll be more than happy to help you with any of your questions that you have on your projects. There's Kevin Lindstrom, also the gentleman I was talking about with the shapes. He can draw just about anything, and if he can't, he'll figure out what to do. This is on our website. It's the most clicked products year to date that we have so far. And as you can see, there's an Old City thin brick. Again, was rated #1. You've got some beautiful products on there, which I think is nice. It's a new product for us. Wood smoked handmades. That's something new you really want to take a look at. Our Hanley plant that I talked to you about earlier has got some products on there that's popular. There's our most clicked thin brick products. Again, the Old City is on that one as well. But again, you see some different ranges of colors as well in the thin brick areas too. Look at the gray that's on there. Grays have been strong for years and seem like they keep just getting stronger. Glen-Gery's ad campaign is one to none. I mean, by far, they do the best job that I've seen in the construction and masonry business. Again, we are an Architectural Digest, The Architect, Architectural Records, and Architectural Products. And again, you see all the nice brochures and all the literature that's put out by Glen-Gery. That's done by that team itself. And again, they're good to work with. They reach out to the salespeople and ask opinions on products and things of that nature. But they come up with the beautiful literature and products we have to help you with your sales. It's whether you're a distributor or whether you're an architect. And last but not least, our values: care, collaborate, exceed, innovate, integrity, and lead. We hope that we do all of those, and we strive really hard to do them. And again, Glen-Gery wants to be a partner with you in everything that you do with masonry. We believe in it, we live it, and we want to earn it. So if there's anything we can do, don't hesitate to reach out to Glen-Gery for any of the help you have. Thank you guys very much for today.